if I could just hear some more information about that as we move along.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the topics that we're hoping to cover in the work session. But it's in that framework, it's listed under, partially under the damage assessments that we're trying to get done in that inventory. But that's absolutely next up on the list for you all to dig in a little bit more about.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, because let me just say, the way I bifurcate, and maybe you guys tell me, but the way I bifurcate the difference between these updates, which are, updates about the recovery process, these are the pieces of it that are kind of nuts and bolts and the things that have to happen: debris removal, recovery of the water system. I would include fixing up the parks, greenways, roads, bridges in this category as well. Just kind of this transactional stuff that is staff led with council input. The work session, to me, is with these bigger issues that are a little harder to get our arms around and also require public-private partnerships or other governmental partnerships. So economic recovery, for example, that is not going to be headed up by the city all by itself. Housing isn't going to even be headed up by the city all itself. So in my mind, and when I look at the long-term recovery plans that these other communities have put together, like Maui and places like that, they separate out these kind of larger long-term challenges like economic recovery and land use planning and those sorts of things, separate from what are like really basic city services. And really basic city services include transportation and park recovery and debris removal and water restoration. And so that's how, in my mind, I think we need to separate out this planning work.
Thank you.
And I tried to be real clear about that when I introduced this back during the council meeting, but you guys tell me if you see it differently. I know you just plucked the FEMA recovery buckets, and and as much as I love and appreciate FEMA, I don't know that is a structure that works the best for our community in terms of visioning and planning the future recovery.
And I think that's why we want the framework to be able to be flexible and reassess. I would point out that you haven't heard from all our recovery support groups, and we have those queued up. We were trying to give you the most up-to-date information in this briefing, and we have additional information through infrastructure, through the arts and cultural resources that I think are going to touch on some of those topics.
At the work session, which is coming up 12/10.
Yeah, no, and I'm just trying to lay out expectations now so that
Absolutely.
you don't, when we do the work session, we don't sit there and go, gosh, I'm really disappointed in this work session. I wish we were covering this kind of thing in the briefings versus this kind of thing in the work session. And I'm just sort of giving you that forecast now. I think that the labels that are given to some of these things, like arts and culture, it does not translate well for the community. It is not intuitive to me that would include a park necessarily. So, and I know you all have done an incredible amount of work getting this organized internally, and council's probably somewhat disruptive because we haven't been included in that process until now.
Right.
And that's, hey, I heard that.
Thank you. I think we'll take that feedback and try and incorporate that in.
Mayor, we hear you, and we have tried to schedule the work session to respond to the detailed questions you asked, not just about infrastructure, but about budget and a number of other things that you identified. So we will be prepared for the work session to respond to your concerns. And if there are things with regards to these categories, if there are other suggestions, or as we describe the scope of the categories, maybe that will enlighten the community.
Yeah.
We
go
lost
ahead.
you, Mayor. We lost you. Can you repeat what you said?
I was just going to say, why don't we just go ahead and proceed and let's see if anybody else has any other.
Councilwoman Rooney?
Thank you. A couple of things. And I know that we're at the start of this conversation. So number one, yesterday I was invited to a long-term recovery group with Thrive Asheville and the United Way. And it was a room full of people. I was really encouraged because I hear from other disaster survivor cities, the most important thing you can do is engage the public throughout the process of recovery. And yet, as I reviewed these slides, I realized that we're not talking about our important work in engaging the public, and these kinds of conversations don't have that framework, but we will need one. To equity and sustainability, we know are important, so I'm hoping we can get outside of just the FEMA buckets, like the mayor said, and also, do the work the way that our community expects us to do it. And lastly, I'll just say that acknowledging we're at the beginning of a long recovery journey, some issues are not new. So I have to express again, it is really hard to prepare for important meetings in advance like this when our resources come in less than an hour before the meeting. So it might be one of the reasons why I felt important to say that at the front, because we have this question mark and it's like, I have so many questions. And I know everyone's doing their best work, but it will help if we get our documents before. And that's not a question so much as a hope. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think we share your hope that we can help get this material together to you earlier, as well as we're trying to get more organized and get you the most up-to-date information as it's evolving quickly, as you know. So if there's no questions, more questions, I will pass it over to Nikki Reed to turn into the housing update.
Great. Good morning, Nikki Reed. I see some hands, so do I need to pause for a second?
Yeah, I just want to jump in, and this feels a little nitpicky, but every time I go through the materials, it definitely comes up. We're framing this as a 90-day outlook, but we're already on week 7, and I feel like that's just kind of confusing. So I just think fundamentally the framing of like the first 30 days, like we've already been through the first 30 days. I think a lot of the information that we're pulling together is going to be really consumed by the public and is important for the public and for us. And so I just want to share that like every time I read this, I go like, wait a minute, when did that even start? Wait, what are we talking? Like, I think what you're trying to say is like recovery is the phase that starts after response, but like I'm a climate advocate and it took me a minute to figure that out. So it's a little in our heads a bit. And I think that like when we had the 60-day initiative for public safety, that was also just, I don't know. So I need to let that out, that I keep being a little confused by that and wonder if that framing isn't doing us justice.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or feedback? Okay, I hand it over to Nikki.
Great. So I want to get started. I'm leading the housing recovery support function and just share some housing updates since we last spoke. And so wanted to just share some of the key accomplishments and what we're working on right now, just to get a sense of how we're approaching housing recovery.
Excuse me, Nikki, Mayor, do you have a question? Go ahead, Nikki. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. My hand was still raised. I did not mean for it to still be raised. But can somebody answer the question about the 30, 60, 90 timeline?
Ms. Ullman is correct that is the beginning of our recovery framework. And what I'm hearing is that we need to be clear in our communication to talk about what is storm response and when recovery began, to make that message clear as we're moving forward.
So I'm sorry. So where are we now on the timeline?
We're still within the first 30 days.
So what was the start? November. Sorry, I just tell me what I don't understand. What...
Yeah, we said November 1st to January 1st.
Okay, thank you.
Was our 90-day start of our recovery process.
November 1st to January 1st would be 60 days.
Or sorry,
right?
February 1st. Sorry, my
Okay,
bad. I
gotcha.
misspoke.
Okay, thank you. All right, gotcha.
I'm just going to chime in real quick that y'all are making it more confusing. Can we just get, like, can all the calendars match? I mean, if we're starting in November, it's technically month 2. Why not just go all the way back to 9/27? And I mean,
Or use actual dates. Then we
Yeah.
just know, right? Like you just
Like-
be like November 1 to February 1.
well, in the slide, Mayor, you may not be able to see the slides. The slide did say, 60 days, and it said the November. 90-day was November 1 to February 1. But I think Maggie made a good point. I mean, these days should originate at the end of September.
Well, I mean, I'm looking at the slides and like the slide says they do once you get in there, like on day, it's the first 30 days says November 1 to December 1.
We're probably driving staff crazy right now. Let's keep moving, but talk about the dates, overall.
All right, so I will center us on the housing recovery piece. So just wanted to share again some of the work that is underway to start to really lay out how we're approaching housing recovery. So you'll see first is a reflection of how we're using land use to help address housing recovery. So our development services and planning urban design staff are creating a one-pager on temporary use permitting for interim housing. Our first priority is permitting RVs within city limits for temporary housing. This is just a signal that that work is underway. Once that is complete, we'll be able to share that out on all of our channels and really provide more information about that. The second piece is just insight on how we're leveraging data, partnerships, communities that have experienced this before to really get out in front and really be responsive as we can and creating initiatives that really meet the need. And so we met with disaster recovery sector of the National Low Income Housing Coalition to really understand those best practices specifically as it relates to equitable disaster recovery. The highlight there is to focus on supporting renter households, which I know is something that we all care very much about. And I've linked that case study of the Superstorm Sandy recovery to really gain insight there for council members. The other bullet that I placed here is that we attended a groundbreaking yesterday of Lakeshore Villas. So again, while we're also looking at immediate actions that we can do, we just can't forget that the key to both temporary housing but long-term recovery is also being very mindful of those housing starts and making sure that we live up to our promises around funding obligations that we've had pre-Helene, so that we can make sure that that pipeline continues as we work towards the full picture of housing recovery. So very happy home funds were in that project, and we're very happy to have attended that groundbreaking with MHO. The last piece here is that we are finalizing specifics and contracts for home repair, and that's $750,000 with Archer, our Asheville Regional Coalition for home repair, and $500,000 in rental assistance. So again, I know that rental assistance for all of us has been a high priority, just given the need in our community. And so really in response to that, early on, staff identified resources to be able to fund this program. And so we were able to identify $1 million. But then our next steps, just to really unpack our process, is that our next steps was to collaborate directly with partners, and that's Eblin, to really design a program that is low barrier in approach, so we can ensure that kind of efficiency, but that also holds to our standards of accountability, right? We have to be accountable for those funds, but then also we're having to thread our program with other existing federal programs, FEMA programs, for example, that are in our community right now. And so understanding all those pieces is really what led us to finalizing that program design now. And then our intent is that once we have that design, we can plug and play with other agencies. So you're kind of seeing that then in our next steps reflected, that once we have that model, then we can apply that to other agencies and then hopefully have a collaborative approach towards meeting the need in our community. The last piece, again, on home repair is that we've done some initial data on damage assessments, things like that. And now we can kind of dig into that data to really inform the remaining allocation that we have in home repair, to really try to use our data to understand where we see that need being met, where we see it being unmet, and being skillful in that remaining funding, and also hearing from the ground the Archer Coalition really understanding their experience. Go ahead with the question.
Well, that's my question. Should I wait to the end for all my questions, or would you like slide specific questions now?
We have a question pause at the end, so
Okay.
I'm happy
I'll
to
wait.
go with that. Okay, great. So next slide. And so again, now I want to dig into a little bit about the lien waivers. We talked about that at council, so I wanted to clarify that, and then also the upcoming council action regarding the allocation of additional CDBG funds that we've now received. And that's really threading right into our plan at council on the 10th. Lien waiver discussion. Okay, so quickly, the standard practice with home repair programs is that they often require a lien, which is basically a record of a debt, and it's filed with the Register of Deeds, and it often requires repayment of that home repair amount upon sale or transfer of the home. So really, liens serve to prevent property from being sold until that debt is paid. And then if the debt isn't paid, the lien holder may be able to take possession of the property. This repayment amount can be structured to reduce to zero over time. So it just would, forgive over time so that nothing actually ends up being due. And yet it's nonetheless a practice of some of our existing programs. So you see there, it is current practice with CDBG funds, and Buncombe County also has this in place. So we are using bond dollars in this instance. And so we're able to look at how to define this program to really meet the needs of disaster recovery. So Archer gave us some really good feedback on what they would suggest, which is to remove the requirement of liens for disaster-related home repairs of $50,000 and below. They shared with us that some homeowners may refuse assistance based on this lien requirement. That's really due to historically harmful practices that have disproportionately impacted low-income communities. And sometimes homeowners will then voluntarily choose to reduce that scope of work to get under that lien trigger. And so that is something that causes harm as well. And then we're seeing too that the agencies that are responding to this need, they'll often have to stack multiple sources of funds for one home repair to avoid that. And then they're also costly. It is a legal fees and costs to actually record that lien. So next slide. What we're hoping to do here is really recognize that the benefit is that if we remove barriers for low-income homeowners with this recovery function, we can increase that participation. And so that will improve the overall efficiency for that quicker housing recovery. But we also have to acknowledge it removes the city's protection for its investments. We may see that more city funds will be used on a single home repair, and that might kind of reduce the number of homeowners served. And then, of course, homeowners could sell the home upon repair completion without repayment. But all in all, given this, we do believe that lien waivers would be acceptable given our current circumstances. And so we plan to proceed with executing the contract with Archer with these parameters and wanted to share that with council. I see a couple raised hands. I don't know who was first.
Nikki, can you explain what Archer is?
Yes, so Archer is a collaborative of local agencies that do home repair for our community as it exists. So we have the backbone agency is Habitat for Humanity. The other members of this collaborative are Poder Emma, Mountain Housing Opportunities. There are a few others that I'm probably forgetting, but really what they're serving to do is they provide a single point of intake for people seeking to do home repairs. And then amongst that team, they really understand who might be best suited to perform that repair. I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Follow-up question to this. So this lien waiver would apply to city funds. And how much does the city have in this so far?
750 with the ability to deploy that remaining 750.
So, I mean, we're not talking about very much money, and we're talking about a lien waiver up to $50,000 per home. Would this lien waiver, is that also being asked of county or state funds or, other funds that go into this program?
I am not sure about that. I know the county, again, has some existing programs that they work through with home repair at the lien trigger that's on the previous slide. And yet what we are simply trying to do here is be responsive to our partners and see how we can quickly deploy these funds.
Thanks.
Councilwoman Turner.
I'm just leaving my hand up for the questions page. Go ahead.
Okay. Next slide. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about additional funding that has been made available to the city of Asheville. So the city was awarded $1.748 million in CDBG declared disaster recovery funding. So that's the DDRF funding. So this is a supplemental award to what we typically receive in any given year of CDBG funds. And so our intent right now is to be very clear on how to deploy these funds into our community for disaster recovery. So just a high level reminder, typically the eligible uses of CDBG funds are listed here. So assisting local business, rehab of rental or owner-occupied housing, restoring public facilities, services for people experiencing homelessness, seniors, you see all the other services there. And while CDBG funds cannot typically be used as payments to individuals, we were able to secure HUD waivers that did allow for emergency grants. And so you see those uses below: rent or mortgage payments, food, utilities, and we're bringing that up as a specific note to make. So in the next slide, what we are sharing with council is some insight into how staff is really looking at the programming of these funds at this time. So what you're seeing here is kind of a preamble to what we would bring forward to council on the 10th, looking again at that source of the 1.7. That would come to council in the form of a amendment to the annual action plan, and then we would proceed with our conversations with HUD. But just to walk you through this table, what we're talking about again is adding additional CDBG funds to our rental assistance efforts. I'll say that one thing that we've heard early on is that it's very tempting to establish a number of programs to meet all the different needs that are coming forward in our community right now. But what we can do is really be skillful and strategic with really investing in programs that we believe are going to meet the need and really help lift us all up. So you're seeing that reflected here in our strategy. So again, rental assistance, we're working through that right now, getting those systems built up so that additional funds can be deployed in the CDBG allocation there. Again, we've opened the grants for business restabilization, so economic recovery is coming up next here, but nodding to the fact that supporting that program with an additional infusion of CDBG dollars is what's presented here. We're also very mindful of the fact that as we work on sheltering, we acknowledge that people who were unhoused before the storm are also a vulnerable population that we need to support. So you're seeing a line item budget here for homeless emergency shelter. And then also, as we know, part of us being able to deploy funds is to also make sure that we have the capacity to do so. That is something that we have to be very mindful of to ensure that we have capacity to make the funds flow into our community, which is why you're seeing the ability for us to hire some contract staff there in that final line item to help us. So again, I think what we're also showing is just the overall investment. So looking at since October, we're really trying to meet the need of our community by making these resources available. And so seeing that those proposed totals really starts to tell that story. And again, our next step would be to bring this for council deliberation on December 10th. All right, next slide. Okay, great. So I think that concludes my remarks, but I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Nikki, and everybody working on this. Going back to the first slide of this part of the conversation about housing. This is great about permitting RVs in the city limits temporarily. What about tiny homes on wheels? Is that also kind of in the same vein as an ordinance?
I will invite Mark Matheny. He's our Development Services Director. He's been working on that, and I think he can answer that question. So Mark, if you're on the call, I'll pitch to you.
And Mark, I guess let me add a little more context. I mean, what I'm looking for specifically is, because I put this on our request document, I'm looking to find out if RVs can simply be moved into residential driveways and powered up for a while, which may include permitting the home for a greater outdoor amperage plug. For things like campers, if we've got someone with a backyard that could hold 6 campers, could they do it? Are we looking at temporary power poles for such a thing? Are we looking at portable restroom facilities for things? Because campers otherwise will need to be like moving back and forth and emptying waste and so on. Can you give us some more context and timing around these proposed things?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Great questions. And once again, this is early on. And so our initial focus is that the facility that's being used as that temporary model, whether it's an RV, whether it's a camper trailer, your tiny home on wheels concept, something that is that's already in place to be somewhat of a living condition, right? That's the primary focus. What we're trying to avoid is something that's just cobbled together and is being called a place to stay. We don't want tents and yurts and sheds and that sort of thing to be really the primary focus. We really want something that's already designed to be somewhat of a habitable structure. Now, it's not going to meet the residential code, and that's perfectly fine. But the intent of the residential code and for a human habitation is health, safety, and general welfare, right? So we want to maintain those pieces. And the trick is that we're looking into, right now, we've got the model that we're doing one temporary unit per one permanent unit. So you could do one RV per one house. If you had a duplex, you could do two RVs, and I just use RV as an example statement, and so on. So what we're not to the point where we're looking at creating villages or anything at this point. We're hoping that, and this is a matter of getting more data and more actual numbers of the need, but we're hoping to be able to fulfill with what's out there already in the rental community. And then what we can do for these temporary rental units is satisfy a majority of that. And with that, there's things to consider. There's how are these units powered? We're coming into winter, so if you've got water and sewer, there's a good potential that those will freeze. So we've got to do protection. So we've got a very brief one pager that we're probably finalizing today that we'll have out, and we'll be able to announce that shortly. It's not quite complete, but we want to make it as simple as possible and something that we can do pretty quickly already.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate the extra details, and I'm hearing wonderful things from the folks that are trying to gather their heads around how to rebuild, that you're doing a tremendous job. So thank you personally. Thank you. My next question is kind of broader. I'm trying to wrap my head around the overall infusion of monies and why it's going to different places. So I'm looking for data. Like, do we understand how many homes and to what extent in the city have been damaged and what their demographics or need or income levels are? Using our climate justice map too. Do we understand how many businesses might need assistance? Do we know how much rental assistance per month is really needed? I think anecdotally, as much as we can get out there, but I don't know. And I'm watching the daily evictions, and I'm just kind of watching what's happening, trying to gather as much information as possible. I've started calling some of the folks doing rental assistance and saying, how much have you deployed? But I think staff were also talking about this. Do we have data on these things, whether it's rental assistance, business need, home repairs? Do you have things you can share with us as we try and make decisions on $500,000, $1 million here and there?
I think that's a great question, and data is going to be our biggest challenge, I think, in the housing recovery, because when we think about the risk of eviction, for example, really what we're drawing off of is, again, the lens of disaster recovery. What we understand is that any problems that your community may have faced prior to the storm, then post-disaster, those issues are exacerbated. So we're really trying to draw from what we learned in the affordable housing plan process, the data that we have on rent-burdened community members, and really trying to, again, be swift in our deployments of funds, but then also look at information points that we can assess right now, and then also, like you're saying, try to understand from agencies what they're seeing on the ground right now and how we can be responsive to that need. We are also, related to the home repair, we have the data that Mark's team has performed with looking at the damage. And yes, we had a meeting on Friday, in fact, to really start to overlay the different points of, how long has someone owned a home, for example? When was the date of their last permit? Really trying to assess how can we use our data to make some informed understanding standings of what that need might be.
One more question before others go. The county is, I understand, I haven't seen the letter, but the county supposedly is offering out a letter saying they will be issuing rental assistance and that so-and-so a tenant has applied. And then that tenant is able to give it to their landlord as a way of saying, hey, just can you hang on a second? It's coming, it's just being deployed. Are we able to do something like that? And have we? And then the last one is, I want to just recommend we shore up anything we're doing around these limits, 15,000, 50,000 for liens, whatever it is. It would be simpler if we just matched in the county because there's so much information out there. I just encourage us to do that. But can we do the letter is the big question.
I hear that question absolutely as a way of a kind of a good faith connection to the landlord. And I know that's a critical piece here. So I am encouraged by the landlord that are with peace. I'm sure there are ways in which even the contact, as Evelyn seeks to make contact with the landlord, I believe that's one of their first steps. But I believe that would be something that I think would certainly provide an understanding that rental assistance was hopefully on the way.
Nikki, do you know if the county has deployed or started deploying rental assistance? Because, you know, as we look at future buckets, I'm so thankful for everything Evelyn is doing. They have their hands very full because they're more than just rental assistance, right? But they're, you know, understaffed and staffing up now and their 30-day turnaround and so on. It just doesn't seem like our funds will be able to move very quickly. So in the future, when some of these options to vote on where funding goes comes to us, I would like to understand the timing around them. But it would be helpful if the county, you know, maybe we can deploy another round through the county. Have they started?
And so I know staff, both James and Sasha, met with the county yesterday to learn more about their rental assistance program. I understand they're still standing up their portal right now for that. And so to your point, we'll monitor closely to understand if, again, as we look at programming CDBG funds, especially just trying to think through that third tranche of funding and how we can best use that. So absolutely, we're making sure that we're monitoring closely the county's progress and making sure that we're collaborating.
Thank you.
I'm not sure who is next. I see Council Member Ullman is next on my screen.
Thanks, Nikki. I have a couple questions too. One is, I think when we talked last at the work session, we'd asked some questions about temporary housing. My understanding since then is that FEMA really leads that initiative, but I hope that we can make sure that as we're having our council conversations, we aren't just focusing on things that are our accountability, because the context of what is happening in the community is very important. And so this gets kind of to Sage's question around data. I don't want to be making policy or financial decisions only in a context of a program we're responsible for and or without information. And so, like, for example, the number I heard was 1,600 in transitional housing in the county. That type of data might not directly relate to our conversation about liens on home repair, but it's really helpful for me to hold those bigger pictures. And so I really would like it if able, anytime we're having an update from one of the sector areas, that there's kind of a starting slide of like, what's the data we do know about this thing? And it's okay if there's ones that we don't know, but, you know, for example, Sage has been doing a lot of good work to see how many applications there's been for rent assistance. That context really, really matters when we'll be deciding kind of the ratio of where our small funds go compared to the other. Or business loans, business grants, for example. I know that Dogwood's initial 10 million can fund 400 grants, and they've already had 1,200 applications. That's a data point I have, and that helps me, but I don't really know where we are in rent assistance. I also understand that there's a ton of work for you guys to be doing, and that I don't want you feeling like we're sending you on the data chase and that becomes a full-time job. But any of these contextual decisions or any of these decisions, we really need some of that context, and it would be helpful if that's kind of a priority when teeing it up. Similarly, I know that transitional housing won't be our accountability, but that really makes a big difference for me when I'm thinking about, are we doing home repair dollars? Who else in the community might be funding home repair? How many people are out of a home? All of that really makes a difference to me. So I really hope that we can start embedding that into these, even if the bullet on the slide says, this is data we wish we had, but we don't. It can feel like we're flying blind. So that was kind of a comment. Another comment is, if we're going to the slide that looks at the initial ratios for the 1.7 CDBG DDRF, I'm curious, when we look at the proposed totals, I see a balance that basically is indicating a prioritization of rent assistance first, home repair second, and business stabilization third. And I want to nudge on that, because I do feel as though if people are employed, paying rent is going to be way more realistic. And so what's our unemployment applications? What's our disaster unemployment applications? I just don't have relativity here, and I don't want us, it's hard for me to confidently make a decision if I'm just picking like where my heart sings. And so I do, when I see those proposed ratios, I have a lot of questions on if and how we're prioritizing the funds, how many people are impacted by the funds, what's the greatest leverage for the funds. And then my kind of final inquiry is this homeless emergency shelter proposed allocation. Just like, tell me more about what that actually is. I think that when we're looking at stabilizing housing, keeping people housed, very important number one goal, so that they don't end up in a homeless shelter situation. But is that talking about the people who lost their homes and we're going to need excess shelter space because they are now homeless because of the storm? Is this talking about supporting the VRQ because we had one of our largest homeless shelters destroyed for the storm? So I just would love to understand more what those three words actually mean as we lead up to decision making about the ratios of where these funds go.
And Emily has joined us if she wants to share a little bit. I'll say again, part of our strategy too is to be very clear on, and like what you're saying, how FEMA is operating in their individual assistance piece. And I appreciate that data question. We will start to bring forward some of the FEMA data. Now it's county-wide, but still, if that helps to provide context, I think that would be great, because what we're seeing, and again, some of the best practices that we're pulling from, is to really, number one job is to help support FEMA to do their work. That's where that temporary use permitting is going to be key into allowing that to happen. But then second is to be skillful with our funds on how to supplement where FEMA is not serving. For example, where we see people coming up on rental assistance, that need there is people who are suffering from the economic impacts, not the direct housing per se impacts of losing their house due to storm related issues, but really having that economic fallout as a result of being out of work for a period of time. So, but I'll just pause for a second to invite Emily, if she's on the call, to really say more about the shelter.
Sure. Good morning. I'll give you a few shelter updates, and I'm happy to answer any questions. The VRQ was flooded, as you mentioned, so that property is offline for the next year. That's important in two ways. One, that is it's transitional housing and permanent housing for veterans. Over 200 veterans live there daily. Those folks have mostly migrated to the Quality Inn, which is just down the road from the VRQ, and are continuing to be supported by ABCCM. The VA has technical assistance here on the ground working with folks there to identify options. So I think there is robust support for veterans who are living in that location. ABCCM is looking to rebuild there and hoping to be open by Veterans Day of next year. Secondly, on that location, ABCCM was set to host Code Purple for Men at that facility. So obviously, I appreciate that reaction. Obviously is not able to do that. We have all worked very hard to identify another location for that because Code Purple is critically important. ABCCM has been able to do that. So Code Purple has been called tomorrow for the first time this season. ABCCM is ready to go and operational. They will provide Code Purple shelter for women and women with children at Transformation Village, as always planned. No changes there. And then they were able to secure a location for men at 20th Street, which is their former admin building just off of Patton Avenue near Goodwill and the DMV. They had sold that property recently, but were able to work with the new owner on securing that location for the winter for men. Again, Code Purple just called yesterday for tomorrow night for the first time this season. So it's a relief to me personally that they were able to make those options available for folks. Secondly, other key shelter activity that's happening, in addition, obviously, to kind of ongoing shelter capacity and demand in our community, is that the Red Cross had been operating disaster shelters, as you know. Most of those have closed, and the Gold's Gym location is, Red Cross had planned to close that December 10th, still had a number of people there, so we worked with them to transition those operations to the rescue mission, Western Carolina Rescue Ministries, assumed operations at Gold's Gym on November 10th in partnership with Red Cross, and Red Cross is fully funding that operation through the end of the calendar year. Really incredible partnership from them to ensure continuity of shelter for people who are disaster impacted. Some of those are folks who were homeless before the storm and who sought shelter in the storm. ABCCM had called Code Purple because of the storm, and so folks at the VRQ and Code Purple shelter had to be evacuated into Red Cross disaster shelters. So Rescue Mission is continuing operations there through the end of the calendar year when that space will no longer be available. So what we are working on right now through the shelter planning work group of the COC, which is doubling as the shelter work group for the county's housing recovery task force. That group is working on continuity of care for people who are in that shelter, both the folks who are in shelter now and expecting that additional people will need shelter. People are continuing to need shelter connected to the disaster as, you know, temporary plans change for people or new problems emerge. So we are expecting that we will need shelter beginning January 1st. So the intention here is to be sure that we have some resources available for that we can marry with any other disaster related resources so that we have that shelter capacity in the new year. I don't know yet where that would be. I don't know how much it would cost. I don't know how many beds it would have. All of that planning work has to happen through the shelter planning work group, and in partnership with the rescue mission, they are intending to continue that operation.
Thanks, Emily. That's super helpful. Let me crisp up kind of an inquiry I'd had to Nikki is, can you talk to me about the proposed split here between rent assistance and business stabilization? And is there data behind why you're looking at a 50-50 split here, or what's kind of the rationale of this current status?
Again, I think this is, for me, this is reflective of just the need that we've seen in our community. We have, I think, opened the Mountain BizWorks CDBG portal last week. So we're seeing some of the initial data from that. I think by the time that this goes to council on the 10th, we should be able to have some information to report out publicly about that and perhaps inform the decision here. So we can certainly share that at that time. And then with rental assistance, we're just, again, informing this based off what best practices we know of how, again, the economic impacts are definitely making it harder for people to pay for rent. Some of the, again, I look at the public comment that was held at council the other night also as a data point that we're looking at to understand what the community is voicing in terms of need. So I appreciate your inquiry earlier to say what other kind of data can we use to inform this. I think housing data just is the slowest to really help us understand. But this is just, again, kind of splitting that difference between those two in terms of trying to meet both those needs. But we can certainly just pay attention to how data would be helpful to really frame this up.
Yeah, because I do think that looking at leverage is important, and how many humans can stay in their home is really the rent assistance play, and the business stabilization play is how many people can maintain an income. They're very different indicators and they're very different outcomes, and we need way more money for all of them. But I think that leverage is important. I do have a sense that if we give people rent 1 month and they're unemployed for 6 months, that that can be challenging, right? Whereas if we can maintain workforce, it might have that bigger impact for sustainability of those people who need rent too. But thanks.
I have Councilmember Mosley up next on my screen for questions.
Mine's a pretty quick question. It's, I guess, to either you or Mark. Earlier in the conversation, we were discussing temporary RV permits. What is the time frame for that? Is that the usual 1 year, or what does temporary mean in this regard?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. So anytime we issue a temporary use permit, it always starts at 6 months. It's 180 days. But under these conditions, we're certainly going to have flexibility on that. We'll see where everything is. We can extend them another 6 months. There's a reality that under certain conditions that may get extended again. But while it's hard to have a conversation about control measures, we have some control measures even post recovery, and so we want to be sure that we have a method of being able to identify what units are out there and who's probably applied for that. So we certainly don't have an issue with extensions under a need, but we also want to have control of the post recovery.
And so process or procedural question, each time an extension is contemplated or granted, is that something that has to come back to the full council, or is that a decision staff makes on its own?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So it's just a permitting process. So that would specifically just be through our department.
Councilmember Roney is next for questions.
Thank you. I think I have two. So once again, it's pretty clear to me that a dashboard that includes our recovery funding, partner contracts, and how much has been deployed would be a beneficial tool, not just for council, but when we're engaging the public and informing the community. So where are we at with that? Or do staff need to hear more council support for a dashboard tool? Because I think we're hearing a lot of questions that could be answered in one place.
We are aware of the request for dashboards, and a dashboard is underway and in development. We don't have a date yet that we can give you, but I just want you to know that that is something we are working on, and we will have updates for you soon.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure that we were doing our role in providing the support that's needed. And then do we have a citywide contact to provide letters of support for FEMA appeals for the water outage? I know that Duke Energy letters about specific addresses that had power outages has been a really effective addition for folks to upload and getting the FEMA support, which could help with bills and rental assistance and getting our applications unclogged. But I'm also hearing that city water outages, a letter that is specific to the address would be helpful for businesses also being able to complete their insurance claims. Instead of scattershotting this, having like one location might be helpful. And I'm hearing that would probably be the water department, but I don't know if it's a capacity issue or things are slipping through the cracks, but I'm hearing from businesses that they've tried to access our water department and they haven't had success. So is it the water department folks should contact? Is it a different recovery contact? What is our process?
And I know that the water department has an update later in the slideshow. So, and I know David's on the call. I don't know if he wants to answer now or just, I see Brad. Okay, Go ahead, Brad.
Thank you, Nikki. And to your question, Councilmember Roney, at least to a part of it, with regard to individuals looking to the city for some sort of a letter, providing necessary information for the purpose of obtaining their insurance, and this is private insurance. This is not FEMA. We have been issuing those upon request to the extent that we are able. Those requests have been going to different locations, quite frankly. We've received some in my office, the risk management department has received some, and the water department has received some. We internally, by previous process, always funnel those through our risk manager's office since they are our primary insurance experts, but we collaborate between my office and the water department on those. So we would suggest, and certainly feel free to share this with all of your constituents, that if they have a request, please reach out to the city's risk management department. That contact information is on our city website, and we are already processing those requests. I don't know any that we have turned down thus far, so we make sure that they get to the right place. We are happy to work with them on providing those letters.
So what I'm hearing is related to folks that are trying to get recovery resources that may need documentation of the express need. Businesses with insurance claims should go to risk management. And then what about renters and homeowners that are looking for rent and mortgage assistance? Do they go to the water department?
I may not be the best one to answer that question. If you are just talking about general rent and mortgage assistance, I think that they are looking at some of the other programs that either we or others have set up. And that would be separate from us assisting them with insurance. Now, what you're saying is if they need a letter to assist them with that, then I would certainly request that, and again, when we get to our water folks, just to make sure that they don't have a different answer for you.
Thank you.
Just a couple follow-ups. I do have one that has been already drafted for all businesses. I'll email that to you. It seems like updating it for residential language could be pretty quick. But some businesses have had that for the last couple weeks. I know the city also prepared one specific to restaurants and deployed it through AIR, our local independent restaurant group. So there is some of that out there. I'll email what I have. Follow up to a couple things. So I guess, Mark, if you're still with us, are we saying, I heard you say one RV per residence. If someone has 4 lots, can they have RVs? Or are we only speaking about existing residential homes? I'm asking because these are questions already in my inbox. I'd like to be able to answer them rather than say we're still finding out.
Yeah, thank you. At this point in time, we're just identifying somewhere that has an existing unit, right? So if there's already a house there, then you can put, and it's 1 for 1 depending on the units. We haven't investigated. We don't know yet that we have a need to open lots and what that,
let me give you a more specific,
so to speak, turns into.
Let me be more specific. Myself, I have a house. I have 4 lots around my house. Can I house 4 RVs?
As of today, we're looking at that would be 1, right? It's based on the actual unit. Yep.
Okay, I would love for us to reconsider that for some of these situations that I have 2 driveways. I have a big empty piece of land on a transportation corridor. It seems like a simple fix. And I know we're thinking, some folks in the county, that number is 1,600 folks in transitional housing, but it may be important that some of these folks that were displaced from the county have an option to relocate into the city, maybe because they lost their vehicle. Maybe they need access to jobs and can't purchase a vehicle again, So just kind of encouraging us to keep looking at that and doing more than maybe the 1 per if the situation fits. And then are we saying that it is acceptable to also have a temporary portable restroom there? I don't necessarily mean a porta-john in the winter, but some of these facilities that are like a cluster of showers. Or taking on RV guests, going to have to allow them to be in their home too. That's kind of
And that's one and both great questions. And just to be sure on your first part of the statement is we are not not including anything, right? Right now we just started to get this going, and this is the one that we could stand up the quickest and make the most sense. And to your second part is why we're looking once again at something that is a dwelling or a residential style unit, is that these will have tanks in them already, right? So we're looking for something that has that those sanitation measures already in place, and that may be an arrangement with a
well, it's not
a
going to
sucker
work
truck
for the
for
winter.
a lack of a better term.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to have plumbing facilities in their RVs through the winter unless they have heat and wrapped stuff. I mean, just
There's heat tape systems, and that's right. Yeah.
Okay, because the cluster of bathrooms could serve an entire neighborhood hosting each an RV. You know what I mean? So just encouraging creativity here and quickly. We know that FEMA is working to drop modular homes, but it's moving slowly. We know, sheds, all these things are being built, but it's moving slowly. So anything we can do to help urge that and move that need along quicker would be great. And then one last thing about data, because there's been lots of calls for data, but I reached out to y'all. I think it's on the council spreadsheet too. Even larger data, like how much vehicle loss has happened, I think is important. We've got nonprofits that are trying to deploy vehicles, donated vehicles, but don't know where the biggest need is. I talked to our FEMA rep, Hannah, yesterday. She doesn't have that data. We don't have that data. The county doesn't have that data, but everybody believes there's a state representative somewhere that has this data, including the lists by county with zip codes, meaning we could get city data, because we keep saying we just have county data, but it's in there somewhere. It's in there, and we have really great staff that can, write codes and break down spreadsheets very quickly. So if we can get actual data, it would be so helpful to have local data, including things like, do you need a vehicle? And that's it for me, I think, right now. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Council. I'll turn it back over to Bridget.
Oh, wait, I wanted to just to say one more thing about data. You guys are like, okay, you do include a lot of data in the daily emails, and the county has a whole data, a lot of data in their emails. And then there's a lot of data given at the 11 o'clock daily briefing. So I assume there's a lot of data out there. It's just a matter of pulling it together and echoing the support for a dashboard as soon as possible. And I know you all are stretched very thin here. It is one question for, I don't know who, is Haggerty watching these? Is Haggerty on this call just so that they can hear this discussion and help guide staff in the council sort of staff working relationship as we move through recovery? They may have some thoughts about this. That was kind of rhetorical. If they're not watching, I hope they do watch.
They are here and they are on the call.
Okay, great. So one of the things that I'm hearing, and as you all know, I'm leaving tomorrow for Washington to go with a group of folks from Western North Carolina, the mayor of Lake Lure, the mayor of Chimney Rock, the Madison County manager, Amanda Edwards, the new chair of the Buncombe County Commission. We're going to Washington to talk to, we'll be at the White House tomorrow, and then we'll be on the Hill on Thursday to talk about funding for recovery in Western North Carolina. And we've got, great advocates there that are working hard to try to get a spending package through. Likewise, I'm actually going down to see Governor-elect Stein right now in Chimney Rock, and we're going to look at Chimney Rock and Lake Lure and talk about what the recovery effort's going to look like on a state level under his new administration. But one of the things that I hear from funders on a state and federal level is that they have to have that data. They need to know, how many people were displaced, how many homes have to be repaired, how many people have to be rehoused, what the business losses were, how many businesses were affected. They have, and because the way they think about funding our recovery is in this per capita space where they're comparing it to, well, what did everybody get in Matthews? What did everybody get in, these other big disasters where they have also allocated funding, and they're looking at this kind of apples to apples comparison. And so those are helpful pieces of information for us to have as we work with those federal and state elected leaders to try to get the funds we need to recover. So I just want to put a pin on that.
Thank you for that.
I think Mr. Hess has raised.
Yes, just piggybacking off of what the mayor was saying about our displaced folk. In that rental assistance money, is there any funding for those who have been displaced but need to come back to an apartment or back to a house and may need help with those initial deposit fees and so forth?
Great question. I think so far our rental assistance program has been designed to be rental payments to landlords for an existing location that you have. And so kind of what you're talking about, we would define as rapid rehousing or the need to initiate again an apartment to pay security deposits and things like that. I will say that part of our process is to talk with partners next week to really understand what the current lay of the land. And so we will have a keen ear on whether or not that is going to be an important point to think about with our CDBG funds, for example, because we have operated rapid rehousing with CDBG before, but we'll certainly take that to that group. Thank you.
Just a brief thought that I wonder if we need to be considering for the December 10 meeting some kind of final timelines. Like if rental assistance isn't moved in 30 days, we reallocate it to business stabilization, or if business stabilization rent isn't used or exhausted in 60 days, it goes to the, whatever that is that makes it easier without more council meetings. I wonder if we should build in some of that. Just a thought.
Any more questions on housing before we move on to economic recovery?
And if I could, Bridget, considering the time that it is 10:14 now, and we have a number of other items to cover, I think we will just do economic recovery and then circle back and do the other subject matters. We also, based on this conversation, probably should add some additional meetings and limit the topics or subject matters so there can be a detailed and thorough conversation of these matters.
Great, sounds like a plan. I think with that, we'll turn it over to Stephanie Munson-Dahl.
Good morning, everyone. Well, it sounds like that we did some digging into economic recovery already. So we'll see what you might have to say about some of our accomplishments and some of your potential council actions that I have outlined here for you. Today, I'm going to follow a format similar to Nikki. Under accomplishments, we wanted to talk about funding to support business recovery. You know that the Asheville Buncombe Rebuilding Together Grant Fund is open, and that is a partnership between the city, the chamber, and Mountain BizWorks. The first round of that closes on November 27th. And what Nikki mentioned quickly, and I hope you noted, is that we're hoping that at that point we do get some data that helps us better understand what the need is from the people that we're applying, the numbers of applications, the total amount of funding that they're looking for, and the major buckets that they're looking to get assistance with. Also wanted to point out, though, that the additional funding that Nikki mentioned with the incoming CDBG dollars, potentially $624,000 for the same amount. And then, of course, we're continuing to explore all other options, including options that can help with unique and special businesses that exist in the Asheville Buncombe region. Our efforts in outreach and engagement really are what there are hands-on implementation work. They really are how we are getting to know what each area or sector, it can be by industry or it can be actually through place-based economic development investments, what they're looking for and what they need. So last week we were aiming for about 1 meeting a day with different stakeholder organizations. We're doing that this week as well. We're continuing to track that with our folks in the CAPE department. We are continuing to partner across organizations. We meet every week with Buncombe County and their report or their recovery support functions. We're meeting at least every week with a larger group of about 10 organizations. That's everything from, AIR and Go Local, that you would expect, and really trying to make sure that we stay at the different levels of conversation to get that kind of input. And what we saw last week is that as debris pickup was moving forward, and we had some successes with that, and the return to potable water, which was announced yesterday and was very exciting for many of our businesses, was coming online. That replacing those was this idea around workforce availability, and I would say workforce stability and access to customers. And that access to customers can come in the form of, marketing and promotion of what Asheville and Buncombe have to offer, and specifically match to the capacity in which they have to offer it right now. Next slide. Bit about commercial permitting assistance. This is one of our top focus areas that we have heard from folks. They need assistance, even if they are not a brick and mortar business. They might need assistance with permitting for special events and also temporary uses. So temporary uses, by the way, we did not put on here because we did not clean the data completely, but I wanted to note that we have received 34 temporary use permits and have processed almost all of them. Many of them are relocations of business on a temporary, perhaps permanent basis out of the special flood hazard areas into other areas like West Asheville, North Asheville, South Asheville. So regarding permitting, we have received 250 or plus commercial repair and alteration permits. Those are only storm-related permits. So far, at this point, about 100 trade-related permits. That's mostly electrical trades. This is all commercial, by the way. This does not include any of our residential numbers. We've been able to issue 47 of the trade permits, and that lag between the number of which we've been able to issue and the number that have actually applied is primarily explained by two things. One is an incompleteness of application. People are putting in permits just to make sure that they can get their process started. They don't have all the information, and so we have those in process with a variety of different, interdepartmental reviewers. And then there's a large group in which those applications are actually on hold because we have identified their properties as potentially having suffered from substantial damage. And as you know, we do a lot of assessments here at the city to provide the information that is needed by both FEMA, but also for the rest of us to help make decisions. And those flood hazard area substantial damage assessments are almost complete. We anticipate having that data in about 2 weeks. So early assistance meetings for severely damaged buildings are our primary way of being able to provide that kind of one-on-one discussion about the permitting process. Right now, we've had 8 of those. We've also served more than 12 walk-in requests for information, all for storm-related. And these are what we're finding, just this is not, this is our takeaway from it, is that there are an equal number of people who are really ready and raring to rebuild, as there are people who are really wondering what their next steps are. So next slide, please. Some things we wanted to recommend for you to watch out for tomorrow at the Buncombe County briefing. Nate Pennington will be providing a floodplain development 101 overview, and he is going to be joined by our floodplain administrator, Derek Wainscott. So Derek will be there to answer questions that are specific to Asheville's floodplain administration. And then in addition to asking you all to consider a vote on that additional CDBG economic recovery funding and housing priority funding money that is coming in on December 10th, we will be bringing to you a proposed amendment to our UDO regarding language that's that dictates how rebuilding after any kind of loss has occurred can happen. So we're going to talk about that on the following slides. Next slide. All right. So the regulation of how anyone can develop in the special flood hazard area and also how anyone can redevelop in the special flood hazard area is dependent on a variety of rules and regulations at the local, state, and federal levels. And as you know, we have not comprehensively updated our UDO in a while. And I guess the answer to that is actually ever. As part of our review of all of our ordinances on a local level and determining how they align with the current state model ordinance and the federal regulations that come from FEMA, we have identified a real need to clarify the rules around special flood hazard area redevelopment. So there is an error in the section of the UDO regarding non-conforming buildings. These are buildings that don't conform with our current zoning or building codes. They were built before we had floodplain management underway in the special flood hazard area. And because of that error, it may lead a property owner to believe that they can rebuild their buildings to previous conditions even after they have incurred substantial damage. And the bottom line is that the North Carolina State Building Code really provides the definitive guidance on this. The state building code requires that any building that has been deemed as substantially damaged must be repaired in a manner consistent with what we call flood resistant construction. And that's mostly what people think of when they think about elevating buildings, but there are other ways to do flood resistant construction. So all of this said, staff recommends updating the UDO as soon as possible to alleviate any concerns that people may have about what they need to do when they're redeveloping after this storm event. And we want to let you know that this is just the base level of the type of policy changes that may be needed to our ordinances to better align what we have on the books with what council and the community's vision for a future, more resilient special flood hazard area, what that may look like. So this is just the first of potentially several changes to policies. Next slide.
Steph, can I ask you a quick question about that? And I appreciate that. So that would be coming to us at our next meeting?
It will be coming to you December 10th. And right now, yep, it's on the planning and zone docket for a special meeting on the 5th.
And so it sounds pretty technical in nature, right? It sounds like we're kind of just cleaning up our UDO to be consistent with what the state code requires, right?
You are absolutely making sure you're ensuring that we have aligned our language with the state building code and the state's model flood ordinance. And really what this does, it helps ensure that we can maintain our national flood insurance program status. Yeah. That's really important and key part of this as well.
That sounds great. When you
Oh, I think she.
Oh no, I'm here. I'm going down the mountain now. So just when you bring this to council, if you can hear me, is there a way you could show us a map with the overlay of this area? Right, it's the special flood hazard area. Could we see a map of that? That'd be.
Yep. We'd be happy to show you a map of that area. We will also be able to share with you information about the number of structures that were in this area and the number of structures that potentially had damage and may need to be rebuilt in this area.
And yeah, the ones that you think would trigger that threshold, that 50%. Talk about data. That'd be really good. That's terrific.
Great. So yeah, we think this is a really good idea. It is, as the mayor noted, something that is really technical and required for us. Even so, it's not necessarily a change in policy or approach in how we actually would administer our regulations as much as it is a clarification and an opportunity for us to align our language and strengthen our relationship with the folks that administer that NFIP program, have them understand that we understand that there is an error in our ordinance. And I mentioned the Planning and Zoning Commission will take a look at this as well and give you some advice. Councilwoman Turner.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So the rules have changed over time. We've got businesses and buildings that are now thinking they can rebuild to how they were, but are going to now learn that they have to build to a different standard. Brad, legally, are we looking at anything, legal challenges here? I mean, if I'm a business owner and I think, okay, I'm not hitting the 50%, I'm going to go back to how I was, and then I find out that some language in the UDO is incorrect and that council is going to quickly adopt something different, I might have concerns. What's the legal here, Brad?
So a couple of quick points there. The first thing that you mentioned that I think is really important to point out is that 50% thing. You will hear people use the 50% terminology. You will hear people talk about the qualification of being substantially damaged. Those are the same things, okay? So generally speaking, if you reach that 50%, you're substantially damaged. What that means is that is the trigger that puts you into this category of analysis where we have to apply these regulations, not just our own regulations, but the state regulations as well. It also applies when FEMA flood insurance is trying to be accessed by any particular property owner. So what does that mean to your question, Sage? What we have found is that first and foremost, these rules were already in place. We just now need to make sure that our ordinances come up to that. As far as anybody coming in now and applying for a permit, the law won't change as a result of this. But might there be some confusion? Absolutely. Might there be some legal challenges to this? I wonder strongly about how anyone would make a challenge to the city, given that what we're enforcing is the state building code here. We have an obligation to enforce that. We do not, unfortunately, in some cases, have the ability to adjust or waiver or modify the state building code requirements. So on this particular instance, the only properties that we are talking about are those that pre-existed the storm, that were substantially damaged, meeting that 50% marker, and wanted to rebuild exactly the same. Now that includes the exact same use, the exact same structural components. And what we will say is you are allowed in most cases to rebuild the same use, even if it is legally non-conforming at this time. So if you have, just as an example, a commercial use in a residential area, it's been there forever, it's legally non-conforming, which means you're legally allowed to continue that use even though it doesn't jive with the current zoning. The only difference is going to be how you have to reconstruct that particular use. And the building code on this particular instance says you've got to either elevate or flood proof to the degree that the state building code declares. So we're trying to push out information to make that very, very clear to the public right now. As Mark mentioned earlier, there's some kind of cheat sheet one-pagers that are going to be going out. We're already providing individual property owners who are seeking permits that information, but there could be some confusion. We hope that this is one of the first instances where we can begin clearing that up for people.
Okay, that's kind of helpful.
But on that point, I mean, we've been now to several meetings with property owners. Steph, you've been there, and lots of other staff have been there. And it seems to be a common understanding that if you do hit that 50% threshold, you do have to rebuild to the current standard. So hopefully this won't be shocking or surprising to anyone, because from what I've heard in the business community in the affected areas is that that's a pretty common understanding. And as Brad said, it's a state rule. And I wanted to just sort of say, I mean, Steph said our code has an error. I would argue it's not that it has an error. It was just not updated to meet the current standard. So at the time it was enacted, it was fine, but it was enacted in 1997 or whenever the UDO was adopted, and a lot has changed since then. And we have updated parts of the UDO, but that's it. We've updated parts and not the entire code. So this is, a cleanup piece that we could have done at any time, but unfortunately now we have a hurricane. We got to do it right now. So I understand.
Okay, Steph, I'll have more questions, but you have another slide, so I'll just wait till the end.
Okay, next slide. Talking about staff next steps, we discussed how we are going to be working on those CDBG action plan amendments related to business grants. And I'd just say an aside here, Nikki and I will certainly look at as much data as we can between now and December 10th. I wanted to note for you all that, we are just as eager as you all to get the good data. Right now, unemployment data for the month of October, it's not going to be here till, the end, I think November 27th, but that's before your meeting. That's another type of data that I think will be really helpful. We'll be able to look at that by industry sector and help you make some decisions about where that money should go. We are going to continue increasing our customer service with our flood hazard area permitting customers, making sure that we can answer their unique questions. And we are looking at the data. So I can tell you that, there are 543 commercial structures that are in that special flood hazard area right now. And what I didn't put on here, because this is all anecdotal and I want to, qualify it and tell you it's not clean data. We're doing our QA QC, but we're looking at maybe out of that, maybe about 100 of those structures showed no real signs of visible damage, but about 40 of those structures appeared to be, I don't know what correct term we all want to agree on here, but severely damaged to the point where I've heard people use, the owners of those buildings have said that they are demolished. Those are the terms that they are using. So we're looking at creating data for you to better understand the extent of the damage in the area. And that includes looking at the number of square feet of commercial space that is now offline or not operational because of that damage. It includes looking at the total potential estimated dollar amount of damage that would be reporting, and that is something that we're looking at through that substantial damage estimation tool that FEMA gives us. But it really is going to be quite a few structures. By quite a few, I mean over half we are assuming may be in that area of substantial damage. And I'm happy to take any other questions, but I know we are running long.
Okay, I'll try and be brief. You know me. First off, so is there a de facto set of FEMA guidelines for businesses? I've been using a resource that is like a FEMA chapter that has different language than the one staff sent me. The one staff sent me was from 2008. Can you send us whatever this the guideline is for FEMA, substantive damage, rebuilding, et cetera, is, so that we're sharing the right information? Second is, are we doing anything creative around this? We're talking about substantive damage, 50% thresholds. I was reading examples in other cities where they said, we know everybody's going to have to rebuild their roof. We're just not going to require that in the permitting so that $150,000 cost is not on the math sheet, thereby reducing the total that hits 50%. Are we doing any of those measures? And then next question is historic designations. I had put up a question around, can we retroactively seek designation? So FEMA has some exemptions if you're a historic structure and that 50% rule changes. So can businesses or buildings that are very old retroactively be designated? And then my last one is just kind of broad. how, as these businesses and buildings rebuild their structures and go through all of this ordeal, and some may abandon and do buyouts, how as a policy and governing body are we looking at the overall district and saying, a greenway is going to come through here, let's just tell these business owners don't rebuild? I mean, I feel like we're not doing any of that, and therefore people are going to default into their own decisions. And I don't want that to land in, like, you know, in eminent domain later, or conflicting plans when someone rebuilds and then we say, actually, you got to take all that out because of greenway. So I'm looking for that big structure of how and when we plan that as well.
Okay, I'll go through these. One, yeah, we'll send you what we are using regarding commercial assessments. Of course, we'll send you some of those resources. The second thing you asked about was creative measures to help people. We are looking at that, of course, across different departments, and we're also looking at ways because our goal is to help the people that are here, but our goal is also to reduce the damage. And we are the shepherds of public safety in our community, so finding potentially funds that can help people through mitigation, whether that is elevating or using a pad or using flood resistant materials, doors, flanges, that type of thing, is also something that we're seriously pursuing. Historic designations post Helene or post disaster, I am not aware of that being a possibility, but we do have our preservation officer and preservation planner taking a look at that. And I would just say for everybody watching that if you're building, some people don't necessarily even, they don't necessarily know when they buy a building. There are ways for your building to qualify. You don't have to just be in a local historic district. You can be a contributing building in a national district, or you could be under consideration. And so we're happy to talk to people in early assistance meetings and one-on-ones. Like if there's a specific case, we're happy to run that down, do anything like that. And then I absolutely understand that we are focusing on small tactics and more granular response things right now, and we're not necessarily showing you the big picture, and that we hope in the coming weeks and months to be able to work with the community at large and council on that bigger picture. And we're obviously here for you if you have specific questions on that. I do want you to know that we're having a lot of conversations with our redevelopment partners at NCDOT, Land to Sky, and other places about what the future of the special flood hazard area would look like. And those conversations include all of the associations and business owners as well. As we get a little bit more of a temperature of what people are wanting to do, that input really helps us think about what is possible to provide you as policy options.
Thank you, Steph. I appreciate all that everyone is doing. I know it must feel like we're adding a lot, but we're just kind of swimming through it with you.
It's tough stuff. We're really appreciative of all your work. So thank you to each of the council persons here.
And I think at this point, this might be a good time to conclude this meeting. We will provide you all with another opportunity on December the 5th, I believe, to continue this conversation. And based on the feedback that we're given, as I said earlier, we may want to add some additional meetings for additional conversation about the other focus areas. So with that, there's nothing else. I think we will conclude this meeting and hope you all have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.